Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me share a quote with you. The great Les Brown once said, "You can't see the picture when you're in the frame." If you felt stuck in your fitness, mindset, or life as a whole, head down to the link in the show notes and reach out to learn more about Project Endure Coaching so that we can help you step outside of the frame and bridge the gap between who you are now and who you want to be. We can't wait to hear from you. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast. Today we have a bonus episode. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and I am sitting next to, in the third floor of our home, the most special guest I've ever had on the podcast or will ever have on the podcast, my beautiful wife and best friend, Michaela. Michaela, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for the intro.
Yeah, I should introduce you as Michaela Rinaldi, as that is your name now. It took a little while to get that change made. Still getting used to it. Your name is still Michaela Horst in my phone. So someday I'll change that.
Yeah, they really don't make it easy to change your name these days, especially during COVID. Everything was closed. So it took me about 2 years into our marriage to finally change it on my license. And I still am working on changing it everywhere, but we're getting close.
Yeah, we're working on it. And so you mentioned that we've been married for over 2 years. We've actually been married for almost 3 years from the recording of this podcast, which is crazy to me because it feels like it's been just a few months some days. And then others, it feels like we've been married decades. But before we get into all of that, why don't you introduce yourself to the people listening who might not know who you are?
All right. So I'm Joe's wife. Like he said, born and raised in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And then I went to college at Messiah College outside of Harrisburg. And then went to Drexel for physical therapy school, which is where I met Joe. And yeah, so now we live in Philadelphia and we have a little puppy now.
We do have a little puppy now, and we are going to talk about him quite a bit, I'm sure, on this podcast. Before we get into all that, I just want to recap our relationship. Full disclosure, we tried recording this podcast about 2 weeks earlier, and we got an hour into it. And I think I realized, one, we were going to run out of time based on what we had going on that evening. But two, we just spent so much time going really in depth into our relationship. And it felt like maybe this conversation would be better served if we gave an overview and then dove deeper into some other stuff. So with that being said, for anybody listening who wants to know more about our relationship, I've written about our relationship many times. And so I'll link some of those articles down below in the description if you want to do a deep dive. But just to give the overview, I'll give my perspective of where things started back in, I guess this was the fall of 2015. I was interviewing for physical therapy schools, went to the University of Delaware for an interview, ended up seeing the most beautiful girl I've ever seen in my life. And I mean that with all of my heart. But I was not confident enough to approach her or to introduce myself. So I left. I regretted that. And I was afraid I was never going to see her again. Long story short, turns out that was you. And from your perspective, you don't remember.
I do not remember you, unfortunately. No, that was my first ever grad school interview. So I was very nervous. I wasn't really scoping out the boys. But I do remember getting a friend request from you on Facebook once we both committed to Drexel and we got like our list of classmates. So I do remember probably telling my mom or friends or something, like I'm friends with the first person in our class. And so that was exciting. But yeah, so then we ended up being lab partners in grad school. And that's really where we started to get to know each other.
Yeah, some might call it good fortune, some might call it fate, but we got paired up as lab partners. I was so happy. We spent 6 months or so really getting to know each other in anatomy lab. And yeah, that's where our friendship started. And from there, we got to know each other on a deeper level. We went on our first date, in my mind, mini golfing and dinner in downtown Philadelphia. You didn't consider it a date at the time, but looking back.
No, no, I did consider it a date the first time we hung out. I I knew that you liked me because you had talked to one of my friends and somehow believed that she would not immediately tell me.
I was under the assumption that if someone told me they weren't going to tell you, they weren't going to tell you. But I understand how it works now.
Yeah. So I knew going into it that you liked me and I had a crush on you as well. So I knew that that was a date. I just wasn't sure if I was ready to get into a relationship. So after that date, I had texted you and told you that I enjoyed hanging out with you. I would like to hang out with you in the future, but I don't know if I'm looking to get into a relationship.
I remember reading that text, and yeah, it was hard because I knew I liked you a lot, and you essentially said, "Hey, I loved hanging out. Let's be friends." And so we were, and we spent more and more time together. Eventually, I built up the courage to ask you to be my girlfriend. Um, I've told the story before. Didn't go as planned. You just weren't ready at the time, and I think that's really fair. And it just wasn't how I had imagined it. But from there, you went to California for a clinical rotation. I stayed on the East Coast, and we grew closer through that time. And when you got back, we made it official. And from there, it was driving every weekend 2+ hours to see each other. It was spending as much time together as possible while we were in Philadelphia together for classes. And then it was graduating PT school and me proposing to you. And you saw it coming in hindsight.
Yeah, uh, you are not the most subtle person.
No, I think what you're looking for is I'm not the most spontaneous
Yeah,
person.
you're very predictable. And so there were a couple things that cued me off. First of all, the first thing was that we had been joking for a little while about getting our nails. Like we should go to a nail salon. And so we did end up going to a nail salon, and that alone didn't tip me off. What tipped me off was after we went to the salon, I had picked a color that wasn't something that I would necessarily normally pick. And you were very concerned that I liked the color. Like you're like, we could go back, like you can get them redone. And I was like, okay, he's obviously invested in me liking my nail color. So that was the first tip off. And then we had also been planning on going to Wissahickon Park, which is a place that we had spent a lot of time when we were dating. And I had a pretty good feeling that you would pick a place that was sentimental. So yeah, I had a pretty good idea it was coming.
Yeah. So yeah, it wasn't a total surprise. However, after I proposed, we were going to drive back to Lancaster to see your parents. And that's where I did surprise you, I think.
You did, yeah. So I thought that that was it. We were gonna drive to my parents. We'll tell my parents. But once we got like pulled up closer to my parents' house, I noticed there was a lot of cars parked across the street. And then when we walked in, you had all of our family and friends together for a little engagement party. So it was very nice. I was surprised. And I will say, even though I knew it was coming, the actual proposal was very special and perfect.
Oh, I thought so too. Best reverse lunge I've ever done in my life. So from there, I figured what we could do is kind of go through the regular podcast flow and answer some of the questions that I ask guests, but as a couple. And so the first question that I ask guests is, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle? And in this context, we're going to answer that as a couple. What is the hardest thing that we've ever had to handle as a couple? And I hinted at this question to you at dinner the other night, And we started talking about it. And I said, no, stop. I want to talk about this on the podcast. And so here we are. And I think there are a few things that pop into my mind, to be honest. But I'll let you go first and see what you have to say.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't feel like we've had any huge things that have been really difficult, luckily. But there have been little things here and there. I don't know if this counts as a whole, but just COVID in general, I think was a really challenging thing for us. Initially, because it ended up causing us to have to postpone our wedding. And that was a really hard thing to deal with. You know, when COVID first came around, we thought it was going to last a couple weeks. And that turned into a lot longer than we were anticipating. So I remember holding out hope for a long time that we wouldn't have to change our plans. But in order to make that decision was really challenging. And I remember a lot of tears and a lot of hard conversations. So that was hard. And then even going forward, once we were married, just dealing with COVID in general, being a newly married couple and being very isolated, not being able to go out and spend time with friends, being even spending time with family was nerve wracking, and juggling wanting to do those things versus wanting to be safe. We had a little bit of a different, I don't know, opinion on what was okay and what wasn't. And so having to have those conversations were hard as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I like how you said we haven't had many super big things that we've had to handle together, because I think most of the hard things in marriage we've chosen. We've chosen quite a few hard things, and we'll get to that. But yeah, it was we were planning on getting married, and we had planned everything. We, you know, ate with the caterer and his family. We had the venue. We did all the groundwork, and we were gearing up for that, and then the world shut down, and we made that tough decision to postpone our wedding, and we moved up our actual marriage. We got married over a month earlier than we would have otherwise. And in hindsight, we handled that really well. But in the midst of it, it didn't feel like it. It felt really messy and frustrating and hard. And I do remember a lot of tears. Almost all of them were from you, but
A few from you.
a few from me. Yeah, because you're grieving the loss of something that you put effort into and envisioned and wanted so badly. And yet, in hindsight, it was a perfect day. The way we got married was the best it could have been. And it's just one of the many examples in our relationship and our lives, I think, individually, of us having something planned and God having something better planned for us. And it's just a beautiful thing. And so that was definitely the hardest thing we've had to handle together as a couple, that we didn't get to choose. And then in addition to that, the night of our wedding, you told me that your stomach was upset. And then progressively over the next couple of days on our quote unquote honeymoon, where we stayed in our apartment in Philadelphia during the pandemic, you ended up having appendicitis. And it started with you having an upset stomach, it hurting a little bit. We went to urgent care. They told you probably not your appendix. So you came home, you're on the ground in pain. I am feeding you saltine crackers and Gatorade in bed for our honeymoon. And it wasn't ideal. And I went back to work on a Wednesday, and you texted me that you were going to the ER. And then you texted me that you were going to have emergency surgery. And then we talked for a couple of minutes before they wheeled you back for emergency surgery. And then I didn't know what was happening or what to expect. And that was at a time where you couldn't visit anybody in the hospital. That was May of 2020. And yeah, that was really scary. I just remember feeling really, really helpless. I couldn't do anything for you except think of you and pray for you. And and that was really hard. And when you were out of surgery, you finally gave me a call. I remember I was in the grocery store just a block away from the hospital, waiting for you to call. And you said, very much still under the anesthesia, you're like, "Oh, yeah, you can come. You can come visit." And in the background, I hear a nurse go, "No, no, no, they can't. No, no visitors, no visitors." So that was probably our fourth night of marriage, maybe fifth. And you slept in the hospital after your surgery, and I slept in our bed. And I don't think I slept very much, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, that was quite the way to start our marriage. We really like we got zero honeymoon
No.
period. Like the night of our wedding, I remember like maybe 8 o'clock. We were still having like we had like a mini reception at our church after we got married, and that's when I remember it starting. But it started off very subtle. It felt kind of like maybe nerves from the day, like my stomach just felt a little unsettled. But yeah, then throughout the night, I remember I had trouble sleeping and it just kind of got worse from there. But I do think that even though I was the one going through appendicitis, I feel like that time was probably actually a little bit harder for you than it was for me. Like looking back on that week or two, it was hard because I was in some pain, but for the most part, all I had to do was like lay there and rest. But you were the one who had to bring me like all my meals. You always like to tell the story of me waking up in the middle of the night and you trying to give me pills. And you brought me yogurt, and I didn't want yogurt.
Because yogurt would be good for your stomach.
Yeah. But it also leaves a bad taste in your mouth. So I wanted pudding instead. So I sent you back to go get pudding. Um, and so, yeah, I think that definitely was a challenging time, but I think it was probably a little bit harder for you feeling less in control.
Yeah, I think hard is relative, of course, but it was really hard for me. And I remember the day I picked you up from the hospital and brought you home, that night you had a fever, and I was so concerned because a fever after a burst appendix is not a good thing. And so your surgeon was great. She was texting me back and forth, answering my questions any time of day or night. And I was getting up every hour. I was really awake and just, I didn't really sleep much, but I was taking your temperature every hour. I was worried about you, but it was also this really eye-opening experience where nothing mattered for me in those weeks because if you rewind 5 years in my life and you asked me to not work out for 2 days in a row, I would have had a panic attack. And I'm serious. And I think people listening to this can relate because there are others out there like me, I think. But anyway, I would have freaked out. And I didn't care. I didn't care if I didn't sleep. I didn't care if I didn't work out. I didn't care if I didn't eat. The only thing that mattered was making sure that you were okay. And that urgency faded after you got better. But I think that's one of the really hard things about marriage. And also one of the really beautiful things about marriage is it holds up a mirror and you get to see how selfish you are sometimes and how your mind works and wants to put you first, but you can't. And so I'm sure we'll get into that. But yeah, that was a really hard time period for both of us. It's right after I said in sickness and in health. It was almost like, I signed the dotted line and then the car broke down, it's like, but we fixed you up and you're all good. And so, yeah, I think those were kind of that period was the hardest thing we've had to handle that we didn't choose. You have anything to add there?
No, I would agree with that. Like you said earlier, as hard as it was through that time, through COVID, through the appendicitis, all that, looking back on it, I can still look back with fond memories. And it really was a time of growth for us, I think. Especially like with the wedding planning getting thrown off, like we really had to communicate and we really hadn't had those like really challenging things that we had to communicate and work through. And so I think that made us stronger and, um, you know, carries over into now too, built like a strong foundation for the rest of our marriage.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great example of how something unexpected, unwanted in the moment, and uncomfortable has made us better for it.
Yeah.
And yeah, we both have many examples of that in our own lives and together. And so the next question, and I think we have a lot to talk about here, is what is the hardest thing that we've ever done on purpose, and why have we done those things? And so I have a list in my head, and I actually want to throw out one that you have no idea I'm going to mention, and we'll see how uncomfortable this makes you.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Um, I think one of the hardest things that we've ever done on purpose that we've never talked about, and that I don't think people talk about enough in our circle, is that we waited to have sex until marriage. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not expecting. All right.
Yeah, well, it's the truth.
Yeah.
And I think people make their own assumptions. And so whether or not it was before or after we were married, right? That's the assumption. So we waited until we were married. And
Yeah.
that was really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was something that I had brought up to you very early on.
Oh my goodness. I remember, oh, I'll never forget it. Yeah. We had been spending time together for maybe like 2 months at that point, maybe
This
not
was
even.
before we were even dating, I believe, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Officially.
officially dating, but
Yeah.
we had been spending every weekend together for maybe 2 months. And you dropped me off at my apartment. And I remember you pulled over to the side and we kind of had our routine. We would say goodbye. And something felt different. And your face was so red, like a tomato. It was so red. And I just remember asking what was wrong. I thought something was really wrong. And you finally mustered up the courage. And I, knowing you now, looking back at that situation, I give you so much credit for for initiating such an uncomfortable conversation for you, not knowing what my response would be. But you explained to me that you were waiting until marriage and you wanted me to know that. And do you remember what I said?
Yeah, I think you said that you felt the same
I
way.
said samesies.
Yeah, yeah, something like that.
No, I didn't say that, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a very hard thing for me to bring up to you. It's something that from a fairly young age, I had kind of committed to. I grew up in a Christian home, and that was just something that they kind of my parents always instilled in me, is saving that for marriage, that it was a special thing and something that you only want to do with one person. And so going into like getting to know you, I didn't really know what your past was. And I know that waiting until marriage is not a common thing. And so I wanted to get that out of the gate early on because I didn't want there to be any expectations. And um yeah, so that was I remember going into that conversation and thinking this might be the end of us hanging out. Like, this might be a deal breaker. And so to hear your response, like, just made me so happy.
Yeah, I, it just makes me sad to think that that would be a deal breaker, for people. But yeah, to just go from that point through the next, I want to say pretty much 3 years of our relationship until we were married
Mm-hmm.
was a challenge for obvious reasons. I think people listening could probably understand. But we made it, and I think we kept our eyes, focused on what mattered most, and for us, that was faith. And we knew that there was, it wasn't going to be a forever thing, and we just had to endure, and we
Yeah,
did, we did.
we did.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so we don't have to spend too much more time on that topic, but I think it's worthwhile because people don't get to see that side of our relationship, or
Yeah.
probably most relationships. And yeah, so that was behind the scenes thing that was really hard that we chose.
Yeah.
um what else for you was really hard? I mean, I think last night when I asked you at dinner, you just said marriage in general was the hardest thing you've ever done on purpose. So
Yeah.
let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said last night when we were talking at the dinner table, In general, I don't feel like marriage has been that hard. Like going into marriage, I feel like you hear a lot like it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. It requires so much work. And that's definitely true. Marriage is not easy, but I don't think it's been hard in the ways that I thought it would be hard. Um, the good, I feel like outweighs the bad and the hard. And so just the joy of having a partner and just the love that we share like makes the work so much easier. So for example,
Gosh.
I was telling you yesterday, like you are an extremely organized person, and I love that about you. But I am about as close to the opposite as you get. So growing up, like if you ask my parents or like probably my college roommates, like they would tell you that I am not organized at all. My bedroom growing up was an absolute disaster, clothes everywhere. Like it was just really bad. Leaving stuff all over the house. And so to be married to somebody who's the complete opposite of that is definitely a challenge. And I have to make a conscious effort every single day to pick up my socks and to put the dishes away. Like it's not an easy thing. But 5 years ago, when I was living at my parents' house, I would have those thoughts that like, oh, maybe I should tidy up, maybe I should clean up. But I just kind of let those kind of go past and I would leave it. But now when I get those thoughts, I know that I have to do it because um, if I don't, it's going to make you stressed out and I don't want to see you stressed. And so I do those things because I love you, I guess.
You guess.
Well, I guess like no, not that I guess I love you, but I do it, I guess, for the reason that I love you. Um, so yeah, I guess marriage is one of the hardest things that we've chose to do, but it's also the most rewarding. So it doesn't always feel like the hardest thing we've chosen to do.
I agree with that. I don't have much to add to that, except maybe from my perspective. One of the things that people ask me a lot about is how we manage our schedule. And just like your intentional effort to be organized or more organized is hard, my struggle is my schedule and our schedule and what that looks like. And it's not easy when people see my content on social media, they see what I'm doing, but they don't see how it affects you. They don't see how it interacts with what we're doing as a couple. And that's really hard to set the record straight because people have asked this as well. No, you don't get up at 4 a.m. as well.
Do not.
Yeah, we're different. We're opposites in a lot of ways, and sleep patterns and schedules is one of those. So no, I'm up early. I do some work. I do some journaling. I spend time for myself. I work out, and then I start my day. And we get to see each other sometimes in the morning. I give you a kiss goodbye, and we do this thing. I'm gonna say it out loud. It's a little embarrassing, but I think it's worth it. I don't know when this started. Must have been right when we got married that I started this. I remember because I would leave and it would still be dark and you'd be in bed and I would blow you a kiss and then wait for you while I stand at the door frame and wait for you to blow me a kiss from bed. And we still do that today. So we do that.
Yeah.
I leave, I go to the gym, and then sometimes I catch you on the way back in. But I go about my day and do my work. You go to work, you do your stuff. We come home. This is where it's hard for me because if I was left to be by myself and I didn't have you, I probably would work 100 plus hours every week. And it's just who I am. Like I can't sit still. It doesn't feel right to quote unquote relax the way other people do. I feel uncomfortable being unproductive with my time. And maybe that's a reason I should be a little bit less structured and maybe make more of a conscious effort to relax. But I struggle with that. And so when it comes to the evening, you're back from work. I haven't been the best at shutting things down and being done with work. And this new year, 2023, is a chance for me to restructure my schedule a little bit. So, for example, tonight is a Monday evening, and you've been home since 5:30. I finished my last call at 5:30, and we ate some food in the kitchen. We played with Theo. We'll talk about him. And now we're spending this time together recording a podcast, but it just feels like we're having a conversation with a microphone in front of us. And so, yeah, that's my struggle is my schedule. And I think it would be valuable to hear your perspective on it too, because you're on the other end, spending a lot of time waiting for me to finish working, it feels like.
Yeah, that's been, I would say, one of the harder things that we have dealt with and continue to deal with in marriage is balancing your schedule. I would say primarily, like your schedule is kind of the limiting factor. So yeah, we've had a lot of tough conversations, and I remember when we first got married, so you were working as a full-time physical therapist, and then on top of that, you were kind of starting your business on the side, taking a few clients. And so, and then you also had another kind of entrepreneurial venture going on.
Yeah.
So you were very busy. You would work your full-time job, and then in the evenings you'd come home and you'd have more work to do.
It was bad, and I take full responsibility for this, but there were days in that time period, kind of middle of the pandemic, where I was getting ready to leave my job, and I knew I needed to do something. I couldn't stay where I was. And so I would wake up at 3, 4 in the morning. I would create content. I would do programming for clients. I would do whatever I needed to do. I would go work my full time job until 8 p.m. On the drive home, I would log on through audio to a Zoom call with a group of people I was working on a project with. And then I would get home, I would wave hello to you, and then I would go sit down at my desk and be done at 11 p.m. sometimes. And you'd be half asleep, trying your best to stay awake just so you can get a few words with me. And then I would go to sleep and do it all over again.
Yeah, I remember that being a very challenging season. And so when you did decide to quit your full-time job and do your own thing, I was really excited because I figured you're gonna have so much more free time. And you definitely did at the beginning, but I will say now that we're what, a year and a half into you starting your business, you're getting pretty close to being as busy as you were during that season. Maybe not quite.
I honestly, I was gonna say, I think I'm busier in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. And my my one of my biggest love languages is quality time. And so I really enjoy the time that we get in the evenings to just sit and talk or just to lay down on the couch. And it does sometimes bother me if you're on your phone, because you just have a million people sending you messages all the time. And so you constantly have things that you could be doing. So, yeah, it's been a hard time juggling that, but I will say that you're good. You understand that you have, I don't want to say that you have a problem.
I have a problem.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a problem.
You acknowledge that and you do make a conscious effort to try to correct that. So I can see that and I really appreciate that. And you have like, I'm looking at your schedule on the computer right now and like you have blocks of time that say MH time, which should probably say MR time now. But so like you do make an effort to be more available in the evenings.
Yeah, I am trying, and this seems like a good opportunity to throw in a quote that I think applies. I'm gonna blank on who this is from. Sarah Kay once said, "This is off the top of my head, so bear with me." Because there's nothing more beautiful than the way that the ocean refuses to stop kissing the shoreline, no matter how many times it gets sent away. And I know that I am far from perfect. And I know that I make changes and sometimes I'm not able to keep them the way that I started. However, I am trying my best to continually come back and to crash on the shoreline, just like the ocean, time and time again. And sooner or later, uh, I will be able to make a lot of those things stick. And I think, because we've talked about this, the reason why I work so hard is because I want a certain future for us. And I see the path and I know the work required to get there, and it's challenging to balance the delayed gratification of that future with the reality that we only have this present moment. And you're really good at being in this present moment, and I'm not. And so we balance each other out, and I just appreciate you understanding, and your grace with me and your patience is really amazing. And it's one of the reasons I love you so much. So,
Oh, thanks.
yeah.
Yeah, I think we balance each other out perfectly. Your strengths are my weaknesses, and my weaknesses are your strengths. And so
I think you just said the same thing there. your My strengths are your weaknesses, and your strengths are my weaknesses.
You got it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it all works out, and I think that we kind of bring each other. The goal is to bring each other to that happy medium. Yes. And we're not always them like 100% successful in that, but yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I want to add that you told me early on in marriage, because I was being really hard on myself when we first got married. It was an adjustment period for sure. Mm. I knew I was being selfish with my time. It was in the beginning of marriage that I first became aware of how selfish I was, because for years I would spend 2-3 hours in the gym. I operated on my own time because I didn't need to consider anybody else in the way that I consider you and our time together right now. So I was very aware of that. I felt really bad about it. And it was almost me trying to overcorrect in a dramatic way in the beginning. And I was beating myself up about it. And you told me it's okay. Marriage isn't always 50-50. Sometimes it's 80-20, sometimes it's 70-30, sometimes it's 60-40. On the days where you're feeling really good, I might need you to pick up the slack for me a little bit. And on the days where you're not feeling so good, that's what I'm here for too. And that really helped me. It stuck with me. I think it'll always stick with me. And I feel like we have a lot of those days where one of us is doing a little bit extra for the other, and we don't complain about it and we don't hold grudges. It's just how it is. And ultimately we're on the same team. And so, yeah, it doesn't matter because we're working together toward the same thing. And I like that about marriage.
Yeah, me too. I think that's one of my favorite things about marriage is having that partner that you can rely on so that you don't have to be firing on all cylinders all the time. Like you can lean on that other person. And I think that that's something we've been really successful at in marriage is allowing each other to have bad days and being able to pick up the slack. And kind of like I said earlier, when you are married and when you love somebody so much, it doesn't feel like work to have to pick up that extra slack.
Yeah. So that transitions pretty well into one of the other harder things that we've chosen, which was when we finally got to go on our actual honeymoon to Maui, Hawaii. It was such a beautiful trip. And at the same time, it was a hard trip because I was about to leave my job. When we got back, I was putting in my notice, and that was weighing on me. When we got back, or not too long after we got back, you left your job for a new job that was in a more challenging setting. And so we had this pending change that was going to happen when we got back. And that made it really hard for me to unwind. And we had this moment where we were out to dinner at a sushi restaurant in Maui. It's beautiful. We're on our honeymoon. And you just started crying at the dinner table. And I was so concerned. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was wrong. And we just started talking like we always do. And you expressed that you were afraid that we were never going to be able to have a good time or go on a vacation.
Yeah, I mean, that was the longest trip that we had ever taken together, and really the biggest trip. Like, actually, we had done maybe like a weekend away or
Yeah.
like a day trip here and there, but this was like 10 days. Um, so yeah, I don't remember what day this was, but I
It's
don't
like at least halfway through the
halfway
trip.
through. Was it the same day? Was it the day that we had gone to the road to Hana,
Oh,
which had been hyped up that this was going to be like the best part of Maui? And I don't know if it was just because both of us were in a bad mood, but we did not have a good time.
it was it for anybody thinking of traveling the road to Hana in Maui. If you get car sick, if you're impatient, and if it's not your best day, we would advise you not to do the road to Hana.
Yeah, but I have heard from other people that they loved it. So don't write it off. But for whatever reason, we were just having an off day. And yeah, we had conversations about you leaving your job, and it was just like I could tell that it was weighing on your mind. And so probably like earlier in that day, we had one of those conversations, and I could just tell that your head was kind of elsewhere. And yeah, I was like, I forget what you had said at one point, like you don't relax well
Mhm.
and you don't see us like going on vacations or something.
I don't.
It wasn't exactly that, but like in my head I was like, all right, so this means that we're never going to be able to take vacations and
No.
go away and just like truly relax. And so I was freaking out a little bit in my head. But so that's kind of what brought the tears on.
Yeah.
But we had a great conversation about it. And we haven't really taken a vacation since. So I haven't quite put it to the test
Yeah.
as to will you be able to actually relax?
Well, here's the thing. Now, this is again going to sound a little bit ridiculous to people who don't get it, but to the people that get it, you get it. After that conversation, I realized I needed to go to a gym. I needed to exercise. And so for the second half of that trip, I found a Planet Fitness. It was about 20 minutes away. I went, I worked out, and I felt a lot better about things. And I think that our vacations are not going to look like the vacation you see in a movie where both people are on a beach, reading a book, tanning for the whole day. It might look like me still getting up early and reading a book and going to work out while you sleep in, and then us having activities and adventures together. And I think that was a one off weird time in our lives where that led to kind of that culmination of emotions. But when we did get back, this is where I was going with this. You switched jobs. I left my job. I think it was an anxious time in our household, and we chose that. We chose that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's true.
And I'm going to share one piece of the story that I think is important to highlight the 80-20, right? And it's not 50-50. There were a few mornings where I was really concerned for you because you were so nervous about this new job that instead of taking the train or the bus, I drove you into work and dropped you off and felt so sad having to say goodbye to you because I knew how uncomfortable and anxious you were walking into that building. And I wasn't sure if you were going to call me halfway through the day and say, I can't do this because we had those conversations and I just didn't know what else to do, but I just knew I had to be there. And so instead of working out in the morning, I would drive you to work. And instead of doing some extra work in the evening, I would sit and listen to your day. And I wanted to do those things because I cared about you, but that was a really hard time for you and for our relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, that was probably one of the other yeah, definitely a hard one of the hardest times for us. And I honestly don't know how I would have gotten through without you. I've definitely had periods of anxiety in my life, and this was one of the like top one or two. Just not days, but like weeks of just feeling anxious. And that wasn't really a side of me that I think you had seen yet. And so this was like a year and a half into marriage. We had been dating for, I don't know, three, like
We
from,
dating and engaged and married for about 4.5 years at that
yeah.
point.
So in 4.5 years, this was like a side of me that you had never seen before and that I didn't really know how to express it to you. Um, but you were so good at just being there for me and listening to me all those countless days coming home from work and through a lot of tears. And there were definitely days where like I don't feel like to go and get on the train and go to work like just felt overwhelming to me. And so the fact that you took the time out to drive me just made it so much better. But yeah, there were definitely days where going into work, I didn't know if I was going to make it through the day without having to call you. But when I was at work, like you were always in the back of my mind and like I wanted to do it for you. Like I didn't want you to see me quit. Um, yeah. So again, it was another season that was really challenging, but also a season of a lot of growth for me individually, but also for us as a couple.
I'm so proud of you.
Thanks.
I am. Yeah. And on the flip side, during that time period of instability with how you were feeling about your new job, you were 1000% on board with me, totally throwing out the window my stable paycheck to pursue something that you believed in and you told me you believed in me doing, but I didn't have enough proof or a track record to say that this was definitely going to work. And so that was a period of time where your belief in me and your support of me meant the world, and it allowed me to do something that I knew I needed to do. And I'm not a I'm not a crier in the same way that you are. I am a crier, not in the same way that you are. And so while I didn't have a lot of teary conversations with you, on the inside, I felt really anxious for a lot of the beginning of that journey after leaving my job, starting the business, and not having that safety net. So just having you to come home to every day and to talk to and to laugh with and smile with, it got me through a lot of those days in a way that I don't think I've ever even expressed to you. Um, I don't know if I could have done that alone, because there were some really, really hard times and just moments where I just wanted to quit and I just wanted to have a job again, a stable job. But I didn't, and I wouldn't have gone back because I didn't want to let you down. And so I think in that way, while it's been really hard, it's also allowed us to both do things that maybe we wouldn't have or couldn't have done on our own. And I think that's really special about marriage.
Mhm.
And so from there, we both kind of get settled into our rhythms and routines. You at your job at the hospital, me with entrepreneurship. And I would say today, outside of like a few minor, hiccups, we're both pretty settled with where we are. And you feel good at the hospital overall. I feel good with what I'm doing overall. It's grown more than I thought it would or could this fast. And that's led to some struggles, but not bad struggles. But I want to talk a little bit about the home that we are in recording this podcast, because that was something we shared through social media. It was such a challenge to find a house, to buy a house, and then to start turning this house into a home. So, for context, we started looking for a house. I guess that would have been the beginning of 2021. No, the beginning of 2020.
Two.
No, the beginning of 2021, we started thinking about a house, because this will make sense in a second. We started looking in the spring, summer of 2021, because it took a full year until we actually bought our house in the in the spring,
Right.
summer of 2022. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
so we started looking, and anybody who's followed the housing market at all through the pandemic knows that I mean, really, the pandemic in general has just been a crazy time for buying and selling homes. And I don't know numbers wise how many homes we looked at, but it was quite a few dozen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, we were constantly looking online and then going to open houses
every
every
weekend.
weekend. And then during the week, sometimes like going with our realtors to see houses.
Or it was calling our realtor on a Tuesday night saying, "Hey, can we see this house?" And then calling us back 30 minutes later and
Yeah.
say, "They said they already have 10 offers and they don't want anymore."
Yeah, that was one of the most stressful things is that if you didn't get in, so houses would go on the market Thursday, Friday, and they would be gone by Sunday.
Yeah.
So if you don't see it right away, it's gone.
Yeah.
So it was just like a constant thing, like on our mind. I remember every day coming home on the bus or the train, I was like going through Zillow and looking for houses. Um, and it was a long period of waiting, and we ended up putting in 7 offers until we finally got one accepted. And with every offer that we put in, we tried our best not to get our hopes up, but with every house, I was starting to picture what's our life gonna look like there. And with every rejection, it was like a gut punch and felt like we're going back to the drawing board. So it was really frustrating and having to deal with people were waiving inspections, people were paying all cash, and it just felt like, how are we ever going to make this happen? Like it was something that we desired so much and we were ready to move on to this next stage of our life, but it felt like we just couldn't get there.
Yeah. A river cuts through rock, not because of its power, but because of its persistence. James Watkins. Yeah, it was a long process. It was almost I was gonna say discouraging. It was disappointing. I don't think it was ever discouraging for me. I think there's a difference in my mind, but we couldn't have done it without the help of our realtors, Jan and Martha. Jan and Martha, if you're listening to this podcast, you guys,
Shout out.
yeah, shout, you guys are awesome.
Yeah, if you're looking for a house in the Philadelphia
Yeah,
area, hit up Janet.
they, I don't know how to describe Jan and Martha. They are like they are the people you want at any social gathering. They are the friends you want. They are the guidance you want. They are just awesome human beings. And Jan is, I don't know how to describe. I'm not even gonna try. They're awesome.
They were the first house guests we had, the first people we had over to our new house.
Yeah. So, but eventually we got to this point where our lease was going to be up. We were going to have to make this decision. It was crunch time at this point, whether or not we were going to sign another year lease at our apartment, or whether or not we were going to go month to month, pay some extra rent, and hope we could find a house in that time. And we came across this house in the Roxborough neighborhood of Philadelphia, and it was bigger than we had expected. It was, from a financial standpoint, at the time, it felt really stressful. I don't know why my mind thinks so much about the financial implications of things. It seems like you don't. Like, I don't even think you know how much we have in our bank account.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably not a good thing, but
Well,
again, we're on opposite ends of the spectrum.
yeah, we complement each other well. But the financial stress of buying a house for the first time, there are just so many unknowns. And I can go on. Maybe I'll record another podcast on this, of how ridiculous it is that you buy a house, you run the numbers, oh, 10% down would be X amount of dollars. And then it's like closing costs and this tax and that tax and like this fee and that fee. And it is absurd. But all those things together were stressful. But we put in an offer, we did our best, and we finally got that call from Jan and Martha saying that we got it. And so we got the house inspected, we signed the papers, we got the keys, and it was ours. And it was hard to believe that it was our house. And we had a 2 month overlap between our apartment lease ending and when we were going to move into the house. So we took our time. I was going to say we painted the house. You painted 80% of the house and I painted 20%.
Yeah.
Um,
We had some help from family and friends,
yes.
but I will say painting was not your favorite thing.
No.
I like it. I think it's kind of relaxing and I like to see the transformation, but
Yeah. And painting too involved on a 4 bedroom, 3 bathroom house, 3 stories, sanding and washing every single wall, then painting every single wall. We did not use painter's tape. We kind of like, I don't want to say we winged it, but it wasn't, I mean, I was spilling paint all over the floor.
yeah, I mean you were. I think I think I did a pretty good job of
Yeah,
keeping
you
the
did.
paint between lines,
You
but
did. And so, yeah, that was a challenging time in our lives, but we stuck with it because we knew it would be worth it. And turning this house into a home has been a fun process. And that brings us, I think, to the hardest thing that we've done in recent memory. We got a dog.
oh yeah.
You were confused there for a second.
I wasn't sure what you were going for, but yeah, we got a puppy 3 weeks ago. More than that?
4.5 weeks
Four
ago.
and a half weeks ago.
Yeah. Now, for context, Michaela had been wanting a dog for a long time, and I knew that a dog was going to change how we lived our lives quite a bit. And I was hanging on to as much freedom and structure and control as possible for as long as possible. But something just moved inside of me, and I said, you know what? I think it's now or never because it's never going to be a better time than right now. So we actually came downstairs and I had a quarter and I said, we're going to flip a coin and you pick in the air and you called tails and it landed on tails and we ended up getting a dog.
Yeah. That might have been the most spontaneous you have been in
Yeah.
our marriage.
Yeah. Well, it was one of those things. I mean, like entrepreneurship, you have to do it and figure it out.
Yeah.
You can't figure it out and then do it. You have to do it and then figure it out. And I realized that this was one of those situations. And when I understood that, it clicked. I just knew we had to do it and figure it out. And we're in the process of figuring it out. And it is hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew that it was gonna be hard going into it, that it was gonna be a lifestyle change. And it has been hard. I mean, it's definitely rewarding getting to, come home to a little puppy every day and
Best.
see him grow up. So I wouldn't change it at all. But yeah, especially those first couple of days were a challenge. And it's hard coming home and having to like I get home from work and then my responsibilities are Theo and I have to take him out to the bathroom and I have to feed him and then you can't let him loose unsupervised at any point. So it's just constant like yeah, whereas a month ago, 2 months ago, I could come home from work, I could work out if I decided to, I could work on a project, I could just sit on the couch and relax. But now I don't really have that option. Like I have to attend to Theo. So it's been an adjustment, but a good one.
Yeah, it's been a great adjustment. And when we first got him, so Theo's an Irish doodle. He's an Irish setter mixed with a poodle. So his mom is an Irish setter, his dad is a poodle. And he's really smart. He's really smart, but he's still a puppy. And so the first couple nights were the hardest, I think, in terms of just a shock to the system. I mean, we both slept downstairs with him the first night. I remember you were on the couch, I was on the floor, right next to his crate, and I think we looked at each other at one point when he was just he was whining and crying for a long time, and neither of us knew what to do. So I just started going shh, and for about 10 minutes straight, I just made that noise and it helped. And slowly he quieted down. I remember looking at you and almost breaking into laughter, but I had to keep the shh going. And
You did a sound machine like that night, I'm pretty sure, that we have not used since then.
that was a bad impulse
Yeah.
purchase. I ordered a white noise machine because in hindsight we could have just used a phone or something. But yeah, he fell asleep. The first couple nights, you got to take him out a couple times throughout the night, and then you're not sleeping well, and you're tired, and you're a little bit delusional. And you were actually sick. You had a stomach virus, so then you slept upstairs. I slept downstairs with him. I wasn't sleeping well because of him. You weren't sleeping well because of the virus. So that first week was kind of a mess.
Yeah, that first week was hard. And yeah, so I had this stomach bug and it wasn't that bad. Like in the beginning, I wasn't sure if I was sick or if I was just stressed from this new transition of having a puppy. And so in the beginning, I thought I was just stressed, and that made me more stressed that like I'm a bad dog mom and I can't handle this. But it turned out that I actually was sick. So those first couple of days, I barely had enough energy to like get up and walk. So I was literally just like lay on the couch, let Theo nap, take him out of the crate, take him to the bathroom, sit on the floor, let him play, put him in the crate, nap while Theo naps, and then repeat. And I was like, oh, this is my life now. And it was for the first couple of days. But now he's getting to be a little bit more independent. We can kind of trust him to run around and play a bit.
Yeah.
But still, it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time and focused energy, and it's a commitment. But
Yeah. And one of the things that I just can't help but think as we talk about this being one of the hardest things that we chose, this wouldn't be possible. We couldn't have a dog right now if I didn't leave my job and was home during the day to take care of him enough to have him. And it wouldn't have happened if we weren't persistent enough in our home search to have this home. And so, two of the hardest things we've ever done have led us to this other hardest thing that we've ever done. And it just brings out this theme, I think, for me, that the hardest things are also the best things. And the things that are worth it in this life aren't easy. And I think when we just go for the easy things, we miss out on the best things. And so it's a privilege to be able to vent to each other about Theo, right? Because he can test your patience. I have never had my patience tested like I have with him.
yeah.
I mean, it's crazy because you're trying to reason with this little infant that is a different species that just doesn't get it. And no matter how many times you tell him, ask him very nicely to stop biting your hand while you're trying to put the leash on him, he does not listen, and you end up with miniature puncture wounds all over your hand. And he just is doing his thing because he's a puppy. So yeah, it's tested our patience, but it's been a blessing. He's been a blessing. And yeah, it's going to be fun to watch him grow up because I think he's going to be pretty big. I should be maybe 60, 70 pounds, hopefully.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything else to add on the Theo front?
I think it is obviously having a puppy and having a baby are two very different things. But I think it's also a little bit of a good test run for us, and maybe having a baby someday. And yeah, like you said, the hardest things are often the best things, and I can see that having a child as well, that it's going to change your life and change your habits, but it's all worth it. To,
Yeah. Do you have, before I give you this dog quote, do you have any desire to talk about what it looks like for us to start a family? I'm sure people are curious about that, and we've talked about it, of course. But yeah, yeah. Let me give the dog quote first, real quick. So this is from Edward Hoagland, who said, "In order to really enjoy a dog, one doesn't merely try to train him to be semi-human. The point of it is to open oneself to the possibility of becoming partly a dog." And I feel like Theo has brought so much joy into our lives. And while our quality time together doesn't always look like just you and me one on one, like we get in this conversation, It looks like you sitting on one side of our living room and me in the kitchen, and you throwing a toy as Theo sprints toward me, and me throwing it right back toward you as he sprints toward you, and both of us laughing. And it's such a joy to be able to loosen up and just enjoy the little moments, all three of us together. So, but yeah, so if people were to ask, when is baby Rinaldi coming? Do you have an answer for that?
Oh, I mean, I feel like we have all the things like okay, so before we had the house, I would have said like we're not ready. We definitely don't want a kid yet. But now we kind of have the house and we have the puppy now. And so now I feel like we're kind of at the point where I don't know if we're quite ready to have a kid, but we're also at the point where, if we did have a kid, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world either.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly what the timeline is, but something that we've started to talk about and think about.
Yeah. I think it's something we've gotten more serious about talking about, but we're still not quite there yet. And
Yeah.
I also want to add that all of this conversation should be prefaced with the understanding that it's not that easy all the time, and that we can want to start a family at a certain time and it might not happen the way that we had planned. It might not happen in the timing that we've planned it. Might not be able to happen at all. We just don't know those things yet. And there are a lot of people out there, and a lot of conversations I've had behind closed doors with people, clients and friends, just that people struggle with that, and not being able to start a family the way that you had imagined is a real thing. And just want to acknowledge that for people listening out there. And I hope that our conversation right now doesn't make anyone feel upset or yeah, down in any way.
Yeah, I think that is kind of a scary thing when thinking about having a child is that until you start trying, you don't know how easy it's going to be. And so yeah, you never know. Like our plan, we would like to have kids someday, but that may or may not be God's plan for us. And so I think with all the things that we've talked about so far, like we have had our plan and it hasn't gone the way that we thought it would. But despite that, we can look back and see that it happened just the way it was supposed to. So as much as we can say, like, we'd like to have a baby in 6 months or get pregnant in 6 months, I guess we wouldn't have a baby in 6 months. But as much as we can say that, we really don't know. And because of our shared faith in God, all we can do is trust that He has a plan for us. And so, yeah, we can do all the planning that we want, but ultimately, it's going to be according to His plan. And it often turns out better that way anyway.
Yeah, agreed. So to move this along, I ask everybody on the podcast about their definition of the word endurance. And so I'm going to give you a second to think. You should have known this was coming, of course. But my grandfather, I texted him and my grandmother for one of their recent wedding anniversaries. It's in the 50s at this point. I forget which one it was for, but I texted him. I said, "Happy anniversary, Pop Pop." And he texted me something along the lines of, "Being married to your grandmother, how's that for a Project Endure event?" But he's someone that I really look up to, and someone who I should have on the podcast, and will have on the podcast. So with that being said, I'm curious to hear your definition of endurance, uh, Michaela.
Put me on the spot. I don't know if I have a great definition of endurance.
Well, let me ask you this. What would it look like for our marriage to be successful over the course of our lives? I mean, what would
Okay.
that require?
Okay, so in that context, I would say that endurance is taking hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of tiny steps forward in order to get somewhere, in the long run. And so to have endurance is to be able to just focus on each step at a time, rather than focusing on the destination. You focus on the process, and you tell me this all the time, like, do the next right thing. And so to have endurance is to just do the next right thing, to put one foot in front of the other, to keep going. And uh,
Yeah, that was good.
that's the best I got.
That was good. And in the context of marriage, I think endurance to me also means making the intentional choice over and over and over and over again to grow as individuals and to grow closer together, because I can see how even in this first almost 3 years of marriage, it can be really easy to grow apart.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that our shared faith in God is the thing in the middle that keeps us on the same path, growing closer together. And I'm not sure what we would do without that, to be honest. It's hard to imagine. But I think the challenge is, how do you move forward step by step by step and grow as a person and also grow closer together, not further apart? Because it requires a coordination, and it requires like joint endurance, and it requires a shared vision and shared values. And it's harder that way, but it's also better that way. And yeah, I'm excited to do that with you. And I already know I'm a better person for having known you, and for being married to you. And I've seen myself change in many ways. I've seen you change in many ways. And yeah, it's been beautiful so far.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my last question is usually directed at a single guest, asking if they have any guidance, wise words, encouragement for somebody who's going through a really hard time. And I would actually love for this to just be general relationship and marriage guidance and encouragement. I know that as we were preparing to be married, I asked so many people if they had advice. And I love talking to older people. One, because I think outside of my physical body, I'm 90 years old probably. And so I enjoy that kind of conversation. But also, those people have lived so much more life than me. And to get advice in the form of a few words or sentences is all this life experience condensed. It's so valuable. And so, one of the best pieces of advice I think I got from somebody, he'd been married for, I think, 50 or 60 years. And he just looked at me and he said, "You know, Joe, you're not always going to like her, but you always have to love her." And I thought that was so cool, because it just, just like you get mad at your siblings, right? You still love them because they're your sibling. And love in the context of marriage is similar, but a little bit different, because love, I think, is more of an action and a choice that you have to make. Um, but even though I don't always, no, I'm just kidding. I do always like you
Most of the time.
most of the time.
Yeah.
I do always love you.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah, I think you kind of took my words, but I was gonna say that love is not a feeling, but it's a choice and it's an action. And so even on the days where you don't feel the most positive feelings towards the other people, it's still, you still have to make a conscious effort to love them. Um, yeah, I think that's the, if you can get that part right, I think the rest of it kind of falls into place.
I agree. I'm going to share a quote that I had pulled up before we started. And then if anybody wants to listen to a few more minutes, we're going to share some embarrassing moments. This is news to Michaela. We're going to go off the cuff. But one of the quotes that really stood out to me as we were preparing to get married was from Tim Keller. And the quote is, "To be loved but not known is comforting but superficial. To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. But to be fully known and truly loved is, well, a lot like being loved by God. It is what we need more than anything. It liberates us from pretense, humbles us out of our self righteousness, and fortifies us for any difficulty life can throw at us. And I feel like in marriage, if nothing else, you've gotten to more fully know me and I've gotten to more fully know you. And to share vulnerabilities and insecurities and weaknesses and to still feel even closer and closer and closer to that other person is such a special thing. I'm so grateful for that, because I really do feel like it is what I've needed more than anything else. And I hope that everybody out there listening can find that feeling and that sentiment at some point in their lives. It's really special.
Yeah, agreed.
So I am going to ask you where people can find you on social media if they want to follow along, and then we'll get to some of the other stuff. But if people want to find you, I think there's two places, and you can direct them to one or the other or both.
Okay.
But where should people go if they want to connect with you or see what you do or your craftsmanship?
Yeah, so I'm not super active on social media. So my personal account is, oh gosh, I don't even know, Michaela J. Rinaldi,
Yeah,
I
I'll
think.
link it in the description.
Yeah, Michaela J. Rinaldi. And then so like Joe kind of alluded to, I do have a creative Instagram page called Michaela Joe Creative, where I post some of my house projects and other creative things going on. So you're welcome to follow any of those. Reach out on there if you'd like to.
Yeah, she makes some really cool stuff. She is very humble to a fault at times. Um, she is the only reason why our house looks the way it looks. I can barely hang a picture. There was an instance where I was trying to put a screw into the wall to hang a mirror, and not only did I have to try maybe 3 separate times, I ended up actually drilling the screw all the way into the wall to the point where it fell in the wall down to the bottom. So she is the reason why our house is standing and looks the way it does. So yeah, go give her a follow, reach out, check out her work. It's awesome. So with that being said, I did get a few questions on Instagram before recording this, and people wanted to know a few things. A simple one was, who's more competitive? I'll let you answer.
Ooh, that's a tough one. We are both very competitive. Um, so that's a hard one to say
It
who's more.
it as a competitive person, it kills me to say this, but I think it's a tie. Yeah. I don't think either one of us wins that one. I think
Yeah,
we're the same amount of competitive and maybe it just shows in different ways. But when it comes to board games,
yeah,
it is on full display.
yeah.
That was actually when I proposed, when not probably proposed, when I asked your parents for their blessing to marry you. First of all, I took them out to dinner. They both said yes right away. I'm pretty sure your mom teared up. Your dad was like, I'm so happy someone's taking her off our hands. No, he did not say that, but they were so happy. But the one piece of advice that your dad did give me, because he had seen us play ping pong and board games, he just said, don't let your competitive side draw you apart.
Yeah.
And
I
yeah.
think when we were dating, I guess because like we had to find things to do, so we spent a lot of time playing games or whatnot, and so we were definitely very competitive. I don't feel like recently we've had a lot of instances where we've been competitive,
No.
and I think we're competitive in things that don't matter. I don't feel like we're
Yeah.
competitive in uh, work or
No.
like with each other and achieving goals or whatnot. I think we're on the same team in that way, but we can definitely get a good game of Rummy Cube going.
Yeah, there's no negative energy in our competition except when it's around Rummy Cube.
Yeah. Rummy Cube or foosball or
Foosball,
ping pong.
Yeah.
We've been known to have
Yeah.
some emotions run high during
Yeah.
those games.
Yeah. So that's that. People wanted to know, the question specifically was, do we train together? And I laughed. You just laughed because I feel like I train. I work out really hard for things. You did train for the Philadelphia half marathon and you impressed me with that, to be honest. But no, the closest we get to training together is going to the gym together and doing separate workouts maybe once a week. Just because I don't think it's something that you enjoy the same way I enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. We did try to work out or train together when we were dating, and it just didn't end the best. And I think part of that was my fault in maybe being a little competitive. I've always like grown up being very athletic. I was typically like usually one of the best in my class or my team with certain things. And so I think I would get a little bit too competitive with you sometimes, in that you have a lot more knowledge about weightlifting and that kind of exercise than I do. And I think that was a little intimidating for me. I do feel like if we tried to work out together now, I think it would go better.
All right, let's give it a shot. So that's that question. Just a handful more. Uh, do you like my mustache when I have a mustache?
Are we talking like a solo mustache, or like what you have now where it's a mustache and a quote unquote beard?
Uh, no, I think we all know the answer to the solo mustache question, but
Yeah.
if I grow out my facial hair and the mustache is substantial, but it goes along with the rest of it. I mean, do you like that or no?
I do actually. Yeah, I know you look shocked,
I am
but
shocked.
I do. You've had this facial hair for a while now. How long has it been? Like
A
I
couple years, I guess.
couple no, couple
Yeah,
years?
2 years. I mean, I don't think
Really?
I've been clean shaven since the beginning of our marriage. I haven't. Yeah, it's been a long time
Wow.
now.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't feel like I've seen you clean shaven for a while.
I look like I'm
Um,
10.
yeah. So the mustache alone, I will say no, I do not like,
Mm.
but I do enjoy your facial hair now.
Yeah. All right. Cool. I enjoy yours. I'm just kidding. That's some behind the scenes what our regular conversations look like. A lot of jokes, a lot of laughs. All right, two more things. What is the most embarrassing thing about me? You can take that in whatever way you want to take that. That was the question that was
The most
posed.
embarrassing thing about you?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Or an embarrassing moment from our relationship. I mean, we can go in whatever direction we want with this. Um,
Do you have an answer for me?
um, it's not so much embarrassing about you, but anytime, especially in the beginning of our relationship, when I told people that you were from Lancaster, 9 out of 10 times someone would say, "Is she Amish?"
Yeah.
And then I would explain that, "Oh, no, no, her neighbors are Amish, but she's not Amish."
Not everyone from Lancaster is Amish,
Yeah.
believe it or not.
Yeah. So for the record, you're not
Not
Amish,
Amish.
but I got that question quite a few times. And then, you know, people go out to Lancaster, there's horse and buggies, it's an interesting land out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think growing up there, I didn't really realize how different it is. But now being in Philadelphia and having lived apart, when I go back, I realize like, wow, like it's different. Um, but yeah, I always loved it.
Yeah.
Same. Yeah, for you, I don't know. Um, you have a lot of little quirks, I guess we'll call them. I
You
don't
can call me out. What do I?
Well, I don't know that anything is like super embarrassing, but you are very particular in how we arrange the silverware in the drying mat. Like the forks have to be with the forks, the knives have to be with the knives. Like they're literally on the drying mat just to dry, but you insist that they like match up, and like the cups have to be all nicely in a row. Like I will do the dishes, which I will say I haven't noticed you doing this as much, but at our old apartment,
Yeah.
you definitely did a lot. But like I would do the dishes and walk away, and like later, like you come in and you just like
Reorganize.
reorganize everything.
Yeah. Yeah, it bothers me. I think if I look back in my childhood, I definitely have some obsessive compulsive tendencies that have carried over into adulthood. And I'm not ashamed. I'm not ashamed of them. I think that, the fact that having those things organized makes me feel better and doesn't in any way, shape, or form negatively impact our life together. Yeah, it makes me laugh.
Yeah. One of my favorite
boy.
stories that I think your mom has told me is, and no, it's not really embarrassing, but like at Christmas time, like when you were little, like when you would get gifts, you would like pack them in like a nice little pile in the corner of the room. And then like once all the gifts were open, like you would take your pile and you would go up to your room and have it in your room. And like me as a child, like was completely opposite. Like I had toys strewn across the place. Like as soon as I get it, I open it and I'm playing with it. So it's just kind of like a funny picture to picture you as a kid, because I can 100% see it. Because you're still like that. Like this past Christmas, we got our stuff, and then you're like, okay, Michaela, like let's carry this upstairs. It's like, Joe, it's like we literally just opened it. I think you can sit here for a second.
Now, at the same time, there's a method to the madness, because I will say, for example, you lose things every now and then. I don't lose things because I know exactly where they are.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
that's fair.
But it's a quirk of mine. And yeah. So last question. This one is kind of the opposite, or maybe actually it's the same in some ways. What is your favorite thing about me? And then I will say my favorite thing about you.
Ooh, how do I pick? So many favorite things about you. I would say my favorite thing about you is just how driven you are. Like to see you start this company, for one thing, to step out on a limb and quit your job and just go off and do your own thing, is really inspiring. And you just have such a strong internal drive where if you set your mind on something, you're going to get it done. And I have absolutely no doubt, like, what you had talked about when you quit your job, about how I, like believed in you, and I couldn't have not believed in you, because I know how high of a standard you hold yourself to. And so if you decided that you were going to create your business and it was going to be successful, I had no doubt that it was going to be successful.
Thank you. Yeah. For you, I just love, I mean, there are so many things. It's really hard to pick one. I love how much you love God. And that was one of the first things that I noticed about you when we started spending time together. And it was, and still is, one of the most attractive things about you to me. So I love that. And I think I just especially love how gentle you are and how much you love other people and how much you care, and you show it maybe in a different way than I do. But I have no doubt that anybody who met you would feel nothing but encouraged and supported and heard. And I think that's something you don't give yourself enough credit for, because I know on a day to day, sometimes in the hospital, people don't appreciate you the way that you deserve to be appreciated, and that's hard. But you really are a special person in the way that you show up for other people, and the way that you love other people, I think, is my favorite thing about you.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. So that concludes this podcast. We should probably go let Theo out. Maybe we'll let him join us on a podcast at some point.
That'd be a disaster
when he's older. But I just want to thank everybody for listening. I will talk to you soon. I hope that you have a great rest of your week wherever you are. If you want to reach out to either of us, please do so. We would love to hear from you and connect with you. And until next time, that's all. If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Endure Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.